Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and an actor, as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today, Heather, really interesting conversation I'm planning here because we're going to talk about the real cost of the figure it out culture. Um, we talk a lot about planning, but sometimes, you just got to figure it out. And I find myself sometimes going down that path where, well, we'll see what happens and then we'll fix it for next time. Is that healthy?
I mean, okay, so there's two sides of this coin. One, there's a book that I love, and I just put it in the comments. It's called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. I have both books. They have like a regular book, and then they have an illustrated guide. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, it's okay. But this book is wonderful because it talks about the different types of organizations, the hierarchies, the different structures and designs. One of which is like their ideal organization, is called a teal organization. And they kind of do a figure it out culture, but in a healthy way where people are enabled and given that autonomy to quote unquote figure it out. But they're making these informed decisions, they're having support behind it. It's not just you're on your own, good luck, because that's not healthy. But I think on like the two sides, if you have a healthy figure it out culture, then you're able to provide that to your employees. They have that sense of accomplishment and that ability to take ownership in their work. But then on that flip side, like you were alluding to, if there's not the support and communication and it's not embedded in that culture, we could have some problems.
So maybe you should explain to me what a good figure it out culture is so I don't waste a lot of money.
Of course. So a good figure it out culture would have rules and expectations surrounding this. If there are problems, like in the book, one organization would say anyone can make decisions in this organization. However, with that said, you can't just do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. You do have to bounce your ideas off of someone who is an expert. Maybe this person has gone through it before. They have data and they have experience with it. Or you have to find some research to back up your decision. Because if you are autonomous and making these decisions in the workplace, your decision is going to inevitably influence everyone and their work day and how things operate. So you can't just blindly go in and make decisions. So yes, figure it out, but do it in a way that's ethical and evidence-based.
Use the word expert.
Yeah.
So we should maybe talk about that for a little because I've been in situations where, oh, we need an expert. Well, my cousin Bob, and
I'm
and my definition of an expert is, X is an unknown quality and a spurt is a drip of water under pressure. Um, so,
I love it.
expert is kind of a fuzzy thing. So when you mention expert, like I'm going hire an IO psychologist.
Right.
But what's your definition of expert that could sort of cover every situation? Good luck.
Right. I mean, you brought up a good point. Expert can be very subjective, especially in the day and age of social media where anyone can say, I'm an expert in whatever, which, I mean, that is a very subjective statement. But in this case, like, okay, I'm going back to the book. If there's a decision that needs to be made, you have to find an expert. You can't just find your coworker or your best friend and say like, oh, well, like she knows all about it. No, like this has to be an actual evidence base. They have experience, they've done the research, they've lived through it, and they've learned something from it, whether it was good or bad ways. And you don't just have to speak to one person. It is going to be very rare that you find someone who is an expert in everything. That's just not possible. And so you might have to bounce your ideas off of like two or three people before you make a decision.
I might have to talk to people.
Oh, the horror.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. I see Emmy's got her hand up. Let's go to you.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I love this topic because I've lived some pretty awful cultures, figure it out. And so I do want to talk about the positive side. So I love that you brought that up, Heather. I think I've worked in the space of agility, right? And there are some frameworks that really lean into the concept of experimentation, which at the end of the day is figure it out, right? And
Yeah.
so when you have a culture that allows for the dynamics to experiment, Agile usually says fail fast, right? So if you're experimenting and you notice quickly that it's not going in the direction in which you think it's going to go, let's move the experiment to something else or let's shift. So that to me is a framework or a process or a structure that's set up that allows for the expectations that Heather mentioned to be in place and allows people to try things out, right? So figure it out, I think, is different in some way than try it out, right? And I think to me that's the negative side, is the figure it out side. And I've been somewhere before in an onboarding experience where I got hired at this place. And my first day, I was so excited. It was a really big company, my first big company to work for. And I get there and I get my computer and I have this cubicle that obviously belongs to someone else that I was given initially. And I had a computer on it. And the person that I was reporting to at the time was like, all right, I have meetings all day, but I'll come check in on you later. And I thought, what am I supposed to be doing? So it was figure it out. Like I literally probably spent most of that day trying to figure out how to figure it out. And, met maybe one person that day, but I literally spent an entire day sitting in a cubicle that was not mine and trying to figure it out. And I knew it wasn't mine because my position was not high enough to get the cubicle size I had. And there were some personal items that belonged to someone else in there. And I thought, well, they haven't even really made a space for me yet. And it was really an uphill battle the whole time I worked there. And this is years with an S at the end of it, of trying to figure it out. And at some point, I got the confidence enough to kind of ask for forgiveness versus permission. And that made that particular environment a little bit easier for me. But there are places where that's not even really allowed. And so I'm fortunate that in that particular setting, it was allowed. But there are really some amazing things that companies can do to set you up for success and not have to figure it out, but allow you to experiment and allow you to try it out. And I think that's really, to me, the big differentiator. I'm going to put in the chat here a handbook for Valve. I did a case study on this, and Valve is a video game company. I don't know what else they do out in the world, but this is their employee handbook. And now, while I don't necessarily agree with all of the things they do at this company, they do very clearly give you an idea of who they are in their employee handbook. So they've got what's called Flatland, where they talk about everybody being on an equal playing field, depending on, although you have titles, you're expected to really pitch in wherever it's necessary, right? And so they go through what the structure looks like, their onboarding process, and a lot of other details that give you insight into what's allowed, how you would figure it out. Because in a culture like that, sometimes you're going to have to figure it out. You may come in as a visual designer, and then you may get tasked with some coding at some point. And they have in their book really that expectation from the get-go. And that's what Heather mentioned there, as far as expectations. Now, if I was looking at a place to work, I probably wouldn't go in the direction where I saw things that didn't align with my values. But the best thing organizational leaders can do is really be transparent about that. And oftentimes, I think when you find a lack of transparency about culture and that figure it out mentality, it's because they know it's not right, but they still just kind of let people do it anyway. And you'll see that reflected in engagement scores or turnover or other metrics that you might find from the HR perspective. And being the leader that actually sets those expectations, documents them. I mean, this employee handbook is 37 pages, a little robust, and difficult to digest in one sitting, but it does give a clear expectation and a clear picture of what an organization is going to, or what your experience that organization is going to look like. And I think the more we set people up for success from that onset, from the employee handbook to the onboarding experience where you don't stick somebody in somebody else's cubicle and have somebody else's family smiling at them in a picture and just say, hey, I'll see you at the end of the day, and then come check in. How did your first day go? Those sort of things will really transform the experience. So it's got to be from onboarding, maybe even before that. The experience of onboarding doesn't usually start the first day, right? You're usually filling out some paperwork and getting some idea beforehand, even in the interview process, right? So giving that reflection of what the organization is like. And then once they get there, setting people up with tools for success, and the worst experiences I've ever had have been figure it out versus try it out, but try it out have been the best. So I love that spectrum there of giving the freedom of being able to solve problems and experiment and try different things and be given the tools, whether that's technology, resources, budget, whatever those things are, to try it out versus figure it out.
You mentioned technology companies, and at the cutting edge, they're trying to figure it out. Is there any sort of lessons we can learn from those groups who are, their job is trying to figure it out? Is there any valuable information we can glean from them that we can use, across the board in business?
Absolutely. So one of the types of frameworks I mentioned earlier is called agility. I know it's a little bit of a buzzword in the space, but it is a popular style of technology development. And the agility umbrella or agile umbrella has, I don't know, like a dozen types of frameworks underneath it, but each of them is really designed to be an iterative or fast way to get to that solution. And so there's actually an article out there titled "Why Every CEO Should Think Like a Scrum Master," which is technically the title that I have right now. And it is about that iterative nature of experimentation and allowing that framework and expectations. It doesn't mean you have no frameworks, no documentation. There are agile principles that are great for technology development. But I mean, these are things that are just enough to be able to get to that next step, to iterate, to be disruptive, whatever your goal is. I'll name a couple of the different ones. So if anyone ever hears this and is interested in starting to hear them, Scrum is a framework underneath that. And so it's a cool title to be Scrum Master. It makes me feel like a ninja. But Scrum Master is really the one that leads people into that agile practice. But there's also things like feature-driven development, test-driven development. These are all what we call agile frameworks underneath the umbrella of agile that really deliver in an iterative way. And it's a framework. And so it's not a free-for-all. And I think that's where people can learn is from the frameworks. I've learned to apply it in an HR setting, in a data setting for a team, and lots of other kinds of things. And you can adapt some of these frameworks to allow for some runway in your try it out.
I want to be a Scrum Master. There you go. Thank you very much, Lee. Let's go to you.
One of these days I'm going to learn not to go after Amy. I mean, she covers like everything, and I'm like, where are we? No, I'm just no. This is an interesting conversation because much of my career has been to figure it out because I show up and the person that I was supposed to be taking, the couple of decades I was in the military, I often showed up after the previous guy's gone. So what do I have to do to take over the job? I don't know, figure it out, and if I was lucky, there was some kind of a turnover binder or something, here are some important things you need to know. Here's some websites you need, blah, blah, blah. But often it was, I don't know, the job title is blank and you gotta figure it out. And I've had to create my own role basically in several situations because there just was nothing there. And of course, military is different because there's something on paper and they're gonna put a person there. And so even if the role is not really defined at that point, you're there and you're going to be there till the end of your assignment, as opposed to in a regular organization where they're like, I got a job. Well, you're probably not going to have a job. So, because I'm not going to pay you when I have no need for you. So there's a little different paradigm there. But when we're talking about figure it out, often that's not really a strategy. When you're talking about a whole organization, uh, it's kind of the culture in a startup because I mean that's kind of that's the nature of the beast. You are figuring it out as you go because a lot of times, we know many startup people really don't know what they're doing when they start. Um, they had an idea, they ran with it, things happened, or not. But within an organization, though, even when you have the goals and you're following the agile and all the things, um, there still is a very positive aspect of a figure it out kind of a culture because, I mean, if you're really providing the space for your people, fail forward, fail fast, here's your safe space, let's get it done. And no punishment. If you're making a good faith effort to try something and you fail, okay, cool. You didn't burn the building down. We could keep going. But so a lot of times when somebody brings me a new situation, a new idea, a new because I encourage innovation in my teams. So we got something that you got an idea how to fix. I need you to figure that out. Don't bring it to me to figure out. If you're going to bring me a problem, bring me a solution. Bring me something that you have thought out that at least gives us a starting point. So yeah, I want you to figure it out. I encourage people to take a little bit of their day and do these kind of things because if I give you an hour today and you come up with something that's going to save me 5 hours a week, I call that a positive investment. So, if we encourage that, we can, I think it was Patton that said, tell people what to do, but not how to do it. And they will, they'll amaze you with their ingenuity, paraphrase or whatever it came out. And that's the way I run things. I'm not going to give you all the answers because then I don't need you. I can just do your job for you. So
In your experience, has there been people who, wow, this person is really good at figuring it out, and this person over here struggles with figuring it out? Are there certain people, like certain people are better at communication? Are there certain people that you've met are just better at figuring it out?
oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we all have our strengths. And
Right.
and it's important to realize, like communication, can you improve communication? Yes. If there's some people that are just never going to get it. And so we let them communicate internally and someone else talk to people outside. You know, that you work to the strengths of the people that you have. And so yes, there are going to be some people who they're great at following a checklist. They're never going to figure it out. Either they don't want to, they don't have the experience, whatever the case may be, and that's fine. We need worker bees. We need the people who are going to follow the instructions and do exactly what they're told. We absolutely need those. And if everybody is taking time to figure it out, well, then you're going to have chaos and nothing's going to get done.
Right.
So you really have to, you got to give parameters. I can't have you spending 8 hours a day trying to figure out something that's going to save me, 5 minutes on a task. That's not sustainable. So yeah, there you really got to play to the strengths of the people that you have and understand. And some people are going to give you, we call them good idea fairies. They're going to come up with something that is just outlandish, and it's wow, if we could only, yeah, well, that technology doesn't exist, but great idea. Talk to you later. So.
It's interesting because working with young actors, there's the notion of getting them to work outside of the box with no parameters, and they struggle. They need some parameters. So, what I learned was just to continually make the box bigger and, still have them few parameters, and it works really well.
Yeah, no, people need parameters. People need structure of some sort. If there's countless examples of zero structure, and it's chaos theory. I mean, human beings need structure. And if you don't have that, chaos reigns. You get Lord of the Flies. There's got to be some form of structure within whatever organization group, whatever it is that you have. And so, yeah, you definitely want to give some parameters when you're letting people figure it out. Give them some parameters. You got an hour. You got, I need it to do this. These are the things that you got to give them some kind of structure. There are very, very few people who you can just let them off the chain and say, go do great things. And most of them are much smarter than the rest of us.
There you go. Thank you very much for that, Lee. Alexander, let's go to you.
So this kind of reminds me a lot of my job because of what I do as a chief information officer that comes into companies. It's oftentimes figuring it out. And so we have a whole structure of coming into the organization that we're not fully a part of and then figuring out whatever it is that needs to be fixed, or figuring out the environment and learning how to lead the company with their IT. And so that's a complex process, but the end goal is always that you do have to have a process. Like Lee just said, humans need structure. Organizations need structure too. If they don't have that structure, they tend to kind of just fall apart. So once we can kind of start to develop that and bring that in, you can start to kind of get everyone on board. I think it's really interesting that you do tend to have the companies that think they can just kind of cowboy Western it, right? And just they'll happen onto it. And that's just not really the practicality of it. That's how you fall behind the people who do plan. Like they say, you can either plan to fail or not plan at all. So it really is one of those things that you do have to have a structure and figure out what that's going to look like within your organization.
When you've gone into organizations and you've had to develop that structure, does it sort of become dependent on how well you know those employees to make sure that they're in the right position for success?
No, not typically, not for my instances. So we really just have to come in and work around their limitations. If they don't have it, then we'll find somebody outside the company that can get it done quickly, cheaply. We really don't tend to have the time to try to upskill them existing employees.
Yeah, I guess sometimes figuring it out is plugging the holes. Thank you very much. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those where tone of voice matters. Because if you go to your boss and they're like, well, you figure it out, or, let's figure it out, there's, different connotations to the way that that's said. I think there's, if it's a figure it out culture, hopefully you're getting less micromanaging coming from the top. But like everybody's kind of echoed, you need guardrails, you need deadlines, you need some sort of motivation. I know that, even at home, okay, I want you to do this project, go do the project. And then I do the project. Well, I don't like it that way. Well, what's wrong with it? Well, I want it to do this. Well, I can't make it do that. And then you get this back and forth. And I think it's, very similar in professional projects as well. If you don't have a clear expectation of what you're trying to figure out, you're going to go through iterations that are going to frustrate everybody and all of that. So I think that there is an iterative nature, and it's that curiosity, it's that experimentation is the positive side. And then it can feel very much gotcha-esque if, okay, well, you go figure it out. And you didn't give me anything, and I've gone the wrong direction. I'm 5 days into this way, and now I've got to shift absolutely everything to go the other way. And now I'm on a process improvement, and I don't know what my job is, and I don't have a clear goal or role, and that's not a great way to do it. I mean, it really is an expression of an organization's culture. If that's the value they have, they're gonna speak up and put people in the right spot. And if it's not, then they're they're either deliberately setting people up for failure, or they're not thinking about the consequences of missing out on these things.
This sounds again like I don't want to put just anybody in that role. I need an IO psychologist. So are IO psychologists trained? I mean, it sounds to me like they're trained to deal with a lot of issues, but this is something really that an IO psychologist could come in and help guide an organization through.
I think coming in with an outside perspective, you're not going to know what you don't know. And so you're going to generally be curious and looking for, okay, what's the actual problem? What's the problem behind the problem? And, what is the goal and where we're trying to get to? So that outside consultative exposure can shine a lot of light on, probably more so the unintended consequences of, well, I don't have, a learning and development team because I don't think I need it. People will just figure out what they need to know for their job on their own. They've got YouTube, they've got, Wikipedia. They can figure out, in short order, the tools are there. Why do I need to provide them? And IO psychologist is going to say, well, you have to be clear. You have to figure out what you want it to look like and build backwards from that for the program to be successful.
Yeah, it almost sounds like if you need an adult in the room, hire an IO psychologist. Thank you very much for that. Rich, let's go to you because I'm sure you figured out Chicago.
Well, so it's weird. This morning, there was this thing called Great Debate, the Great Debate for the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, their Chicago chapter, and the debate was on skills-based hiring, right? So it's, are you hiring for skills or are you hiring for degrees? And so that's the debate, right? That was on there. And as I was coming into this, there's, one of the elements of higher education, and I've come to accept this with a couple of degrees myself and teaching a couple of classes, that you're helping people to have critical thinking, right? To build these critical thinking skills, to be able to look through the lenses of ethics, to be able to look through the lenses of their competence and what their specialties are and all that stuff, right? So organizations are hiring typically to solve some kind of a problem, right? So there is going to be, particularly when you're a knowledge worker, right? You are going to be, to some extent, figuring it out on a fairly regular cadence, right? If a company is supposed to, I think it's the whole Peter Drucker thing. You're innovating and you're marketing. Those are the two things that produce value. Everything else are costs. I misquoted that, but you get the idea. The whole idea here, though, is that we do have to have some element of that figure it out portion to the culture, but it's not universal. It's almost like you'd have a subculture, which is not necessarily, we think a subculture is a bad thing, but you can have a subculture within an innovation related department, right? Your engineering and other types of departments like that, right? Where they have autonomy and empowerment to do things and make decisions and try things out and have that kind of learning development, all that. But on the skills-based hiring side, some companies are, I think, making the assumption that they are essentially recruiting and buying a ready-made workforce that is not going to be learning on the job, right? They just are going to go in there, figure it out on their own, and just do this thing. And I can't think of too many instances where that is going to work long term. Maybe for a project you could have somebody come in as a functional expert and do this, that, or the other thing. But ultimately, you have to learn on the job what, from a culture standpoint, what are the underlying assumptions, the values, and the outward behaviors that are expected within the organization to deliver the purpose of the company, right? So, in short, I know I said a lot of things, but in short, I think yes, there's a cost of figuring it out, and I think to allow people to who are in the knowledge work to do this, but at the same time, there's a lot of compliance that is not. It would be to the detriment of lives in some instances, right? To just figure it out. There are laws and regulations, and there are standards that in like a high reliability organization, HRO, where you are not going to be problem solving this. You are going to be going through these very regimented steps because there's evidence that says you're not going to figure this out on your own because we've already figured this out on our own, through study. So a lot of things.
Let me ask you this as, an educator, but I remember reading a book more than a few years ago now, but the book was written in the early 1960s, and it was talking about a shift in education, the way we were teaching high school students especially. And at that time, things like debating which were, you know, a constant in every high school, was being, well, we just don't have time for that. There's all these new technologies and stuff. We've got to prepare them for that. And the book was talking about all the things that we used to teach high school kids, critical thinking, you know, especially great in debate. And I remember in high school, you know, getting projects in, you know, a physics class where our group had to figure out the best way to do something. So are these some skills that we should really be reinforcing and bringing to high school kids so that when they graduate, they've got the communication skills, they got the critical thinking skills? Have we sort of abandoned those and it's caused us issues?
Oh no, on the contrary. I mean, looking at, I've not taught on the high school level for a very long time, and then I was only an instructor. But teaching college and observing three kids that have gone, three of my children that have gone through high school, there's so many project-based curricula out there, right? Where you're actually building something, solving a problem, using simulation. No, I think that's something that is more and more prevalent out there. That I've seen, in the school district here and in the element where I teach.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for that. Kate, welcome to Work Cookie. Let's go to you.
Hi. So I wanted to go back to something Lee was saying, and I'm also a veteran, so I have that same kind of experience of that military unit culture. But we very much had the same environment where it was, don't bring me a problem unless you have a solution with it. And one thing I found was that sometimes that creates a culture of, well, I can't say that there's a problem unless I've figured out a solution for it. And so a lot of times problems just don't get named. And in my personal opinion, there is value in naming a problem, even if you don't know what the solution is, because then it starts the conversation to get people talking. So maybe a question for Lee in this case would be, how do you develop the culture in such a way that you encourage people to do that deep thinking and to, try to come up with solutions, but you don't hinder the problem naming aspect of things?
That's a great question. If I could have my entire workforce from frontline to the C-suite, all with that mindset, I think I'd have a successful company. So thank you very much for that. I don't have any answers, but I'm sure we've got some out here. Emmy, let's try you.
I'll briefly touch on that because I actually was just looking at a card that one of my mentors gave me. It's called the Dual Change Readiness Model, and it does look at some different facets on spectrums and how to kind of move your culture towards change readiness. And I think some of those key points might be there to kind of instill the culture that allows for that sort of thing. So DUEL, the Dual Change Readiness Model, for anyone who wants to look that up, by Dr. Bradshaw. And I'll also touch on something that Tom and Rich were talking about there. I was a debater in high school. I'm sure that comes as a shock to many of you. I actually got to go out of state several times for this, and there was an organization called the Junior Statesmen of America that I participated in, and I was one of the 2 delegates from Texas one summer to go and do this mock Congress, and all of this to say that it really taught me about the purpose of the organization, which is, civic education and leadership development, was the other part of that. That organization closed down in 2024. So just last year, sadly. And it was really disheartening to me because I got to engage in so many interesting critical thinking based conversations on that. When you're a debater, you don't get to pick the side, right? So you've got to learn to construct a critically thought debate on the topic that you may not even agree with. And so that really stretched my brain like taffy. It was probably the best experience. And it's super not available to this particular organization anymore in total. But the debate, it's so hard to find locally here. So I'm glad to hear that Rich's area has got some programs and project-based things that are really allowing the students to look in things in a completely different angles, maybe even having to construct an argument for something you don't even agree with so that you can see the other side. I love that so much. And I wish we had more of that here locally. And perhaps that there's a an open space there for me to kind of infuse some of that again, because that is something that I'm seeing in the workforce nearby here. Critical thinking is just not something people are leaving local high schools with, and problem solving. So people who go into jobs are asking more questions, and not that questions are bad, but they aren't trying to figure it out, right? They're just wanting the answer delivered to them, which I think is a product of that we're taking a test to assess your knowledge oftentimes here in Texas at the end of the year. Here we've probably changed that test, I don't know, 10 times in the last 10 years, but you're teaching to a test in a lot of cases here locally. And so it is kind of taking out some of that ability to teach problem solving and critical thinking, and people expect the answers to be given to you. And that fused with the figure it out culture is probably disastrous for the incoming workforce if that's the experience they're having. So I'm sure it's not a universal experience. It sounds like Rich's area's got some good programs. So kudos to the Chicago area for really investing in your students. But one of the other concepts that Rich talked about was these kind of sub teams. And one of the writings that I had put together recently was on what I call a culture garden. And your organization has its own organizational culture, but embedded within it, like a garden might have different fruits and vegetables or trees, are other cultures that may look a little different. Now they must be plants, right? So the garden is for the green, but it is really, really amazing to see subcultures develop. And one of the things I put in the chat, which I'll mention, is skunkworks. I mean, that's a Lockheed Martin kind of term that came out there, and it's a small autonomous team that's trying to solve an innovative problem. For them, it was, classified projects. But teams kind of adopt that same mentality that skunkworks, or you might think of like Tiger Team, which is something that NASA came up with, and it's a specialized team that really is a group of experts to solve a critical problem or to solve a project or something that they need. So they may get shifted into their own culture garden and have more tools, more resources, more money, right, to be able to solve some of these things. But I do want to also acknowledge that there are many jobs in which figuring it out is not a great idea. My husband, as many know, is a police officer. That is one of those places that you probably do not want to allow just that much flexibility. Now, and there is rigidity in that. There's hierarchy in those roles. You're expected to take commands, right? And so those sort of structures, that medical, right? You don't want your surgeon just trying it out in the middle of your surgery. I mean, unless it's like within the framework, right? And that's the thing I think we've talked about it, the expectations, the framework, what's legal, right? You want to have those guardrails around what figuring it out is, because when I've got someone, searching with surgery on my knee, I wouldn't have wanted them to just figure it out when they needed to put the donor cartilage.
No freestyle surgery for Emmy.
Please, absolutely not. But even like technology, right? I mean, miscoding can lead to security issues, right? It can lead to critical errors, right? So these are like serious things. No, for me, absolutely not. I'm probably not even going to work on the other knee, because even within the confines of the non-experimental surgery, my knee is still not the same. So but that's really one of those settings where I think we can push into, okay, this is not the environment in which we want to figure it out. Now that can require legal things or even documentation if it's not, legal, or there's not general orders or something that requires that, right? But the documentation, I say, is a love letter to your future self, or it is a love letter to your future employees, or even your current employees. If you are providing expectations, documented expectations, you are writing them a love letter to say, here is the gate, here are the guardrails in which you can work and experiment and figure it out or not. I think that's the other side, right? And then Nick mentioned at home, I think that's such a great example to really kind of adopt into the organization. I took this parenting class once, and they talked to me about explicit expectations for children. So cleaning your room to my son means something very different to him than it means to me. So now I've learned to say things like, okay, so here are the 10 things that means: picking up your trash. It means it doesn't go under your bed. It means putting the clothes that are dirty separate from the ones that are clean and washing. So these are the things that are just saying clean your room provides no level set on expectations for him. So really using that explicit nature of expectations, even if it is, hey, you've got 2 days to do whatever you need to figure this out, and here's $10,000 to do it. That's an expectation, right? And so giving that clarity and transparency and expectation, and no experimental surgeries, please.
Thank you. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, it's, talking about kind of the impact of schooling and things like that. I think the old models don't necessarily fit the new ways of work. And so we need more of that project-based sort of go apply the critical thinking. Everybody gets the baseline of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But then if we've got some project management skills that we're teaching, so that we can see it in use, then we have this big thing called the internet where everything lives and everybody knows everything on the internet. And go figure it out then becomes, useful and interesting. But without, media literacy and critical thinking and all these things, it's not going to look great. And you might be falling for snake oil without, trying too hard.
Thank you very much for that. Heather, I'd love to bring you back in here because we've shifted the conversation a little bit to the younger generation and, those people who might not be in the workforce yet. But, unlike a lot of people my age who look like me, I actually have a lot of positive feelings for that generation and the younger generations who are coming into the workforce. I think they're brilliant people who can make some really positive changes in the world. But with sort of that training and education that we've been talking about, are younger generations more able to sort of grasp this concept of working it out? And should I, as someone who maybe is looking to hire some people, really sort of look at the new generations, the younger generations, as maybe having a better skill base with that figure it out culture?
I will say, so my oldest is getting a job this summer, and she has a very different way of thinking than I did when I was first getting into the workforce. She's very much, she's going to figure it out, but it's not just going to be because she's guessing. Like, she's going to go find people or she's going to look it up online. And she is more receptive to, like, if there is a way that works, like, she's going to ask about it. But also, the way that we're working is so much different than what it was when I was younger, too. We have so many more online and remote jobs, and we have AI and so many other like technological advancements that I feel like the younger generation, because they've just been immersed in it since they were born, is just receptive to understanding it a lot better. I mean, I keep up with it, but I have to like work to keep up with it. Whereas like my children have just already, that's just their life. And I think it's a positive thing, and we can leverage the younger workers. Now, there's also, we hear the stereotypes of many younger people don't want to go to work and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, we do have some trade-offs, and we also can't fall victim to those stereotypes too. So we can't go into these working relationships with, oh, you're a Gen Z, you're not going to do anything. So that's important too.
But that's what you hear out there is,
Right.
we've got a whole generation coming up that just don't, they're not any good. But I've really sort of, when you look at it, they're not useless.
Correct.
They could be, I mean, like everyone else, they need some training, they need to get into the system, but they could be one of the great generations, by the time they get to be 40 or 50 years old.
Right. And also, it just seems like some of them may just have it figured out better. There's a book that I read called Bullshit Jobs, and it was such a good book. If you guys haven't read it, it's by David Graeber. And it talks about how many of the jobs that we do just have essentially bullshit tasks that aren't necessary, or they're just there for redundancy or just because your boss says so. And then we have Gen Z and other people who are waking up going like, this is not what we should be doing. This is a waste of my time, the company's time, everyone's time. And so that could also be contributing to those feelings.
So you've worked in government, have you? I've had a couple of those jobs. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Kate, let's go back to you.
I kind of forgot what I was going to say, so I'll raise my hand again if I remember.
Sounds good. Nick, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we can just take the phrase "figure it out," and it again, tone matters. But the idea that somebody who is further along in their working life, as these new technologies are coming out, they have to go back and figure out how to use the new technologies.
Yeah.
But I think what we can't lose sight of is that I remember in math class I was told you aren't always going to have a calculator in your pocket. Well, that's wrong now.
Yeah.
However, I think there's value in going through the process to, okay, this is how math works. And once you understand that, then you've earned the right to let the tool do it for you. And just kind of reading in the history of AI and trying to wrap my brain around, well, why does it do the thing that it does? Which is the great mystery. If you don't go and look at it, you're going to have to say, okay, well, I don't think we're going to ever be able to make kids go and look through an encyclopedia again, because the resources are there online, and key term search is a lot easier and requires a lot less ink and paper as well. But I think teaching those fundamental skills of this is what all of this is based on. And then once you have that, you have an understanding of how you're working with your tools. I think that's, a way to keep people in the center of it. Your brain is magical. And, if, an EMP blows up the world tomorrow, could we start over with what we have? You're learning some of those skills and applying that towards the tools. Is the tool right because we need more productivity? Is the tool right because it takes less people out of the workforce? And sometimes there's a deliberate decision to say, I am going to be bespoke. I'm going to put a person in that role because I think it's important enough. I mean, I'll take my industry, for example. I don't want to go to a restaurant with a robot server. It just doesn't appeal to me. There's nobody to understand my experience. And so I think you'll see, particularly in those service and hospitality industries, people pushing back saying, we don't use the robots because we want to have somebody who is dedicated to your experience. And I think as we navigate all that, we'll see all the clashing opinions like we do on every issue as we go forward through history. I know there's Socrates or somebody said these kids don't want to work today, an extreme paraphrase, but it's always kind of been there, and it's embracing both the uniqueness of the time that you grew up in and putting that up against what's coming behind you. And just because you have the awareness to see the factors that impacted them doesn't mean that they saw how they were shaped, and they're still trying to understand that as well. I'll get off my soapbox.
That's okay. I like your soapbox. I remember having the conversation with my daughters in high school about, geez, when I was doing research, all I had was a library card. And then, working as an instructor in a college where every year they had the library have sessions to train people how to use a library, because nobody was going to the library in high school anymore except, to hang out. Nobody was reading anymore. So thank you for very much for that. Lee, let's go to you.
Yeah. Well, Nick and I think Dr. Heather, brought a good thing. Every generation looks at the generation behind them and goes, oh, those kids, they don't want to do anything. They don't know what's going on. Back in my day, and I even catch myself sometimes because my experience was different. I realized recently that I graduated almost 29 years ago. So yeah, we didn't have email and all that stuff till I was in grad school. We went to the library. We used the card catalog. We used microfiche. And if you don't understand this, kids, look it up. And so we didn't. When cell phones came out, they were $10 a minute or something stupid. I mean, we didn't carry them around, and I carry in my pocket a computer that is stronger than what took us to the moon. You can get an SD chip, a micro SD chip this big that has an order of magnitude more memory than my first desktop computer. That's where we've come in my lifetime. And you look at my children have never known a world without cell phones or high-speed internet. They don't even remember dial-up internet because by the time they were old enough to comprehend, we had high speed, and 1,000 channels on cable with nothing on. We only had 13 with nothing on. It was So you have these things that are very, very different. And and things have changed. If we think about it, when you went out, back in the agriculture days, you knew it worked. There was some innovation, there was some figure it out, but by and large, if you tried to figure it out, you were going to starve. And then we moved into the industrial age. Well, yeah, you had your innovators, you had your thing, but by and large, you're going to go in and you're going to be on that assembly line or whatever, and you're going to turn the screw the right way every time. And that's what you're going to do. And hey, I could do this a better way. With what? A different screwdriver? I mean, so you didn't have that. And as we move into more of the information age, there's a lot more bandwidth for that. There's a lot more ways to skin that cat. You can figure out different ways to do it. Maybe they're better, maybe they're not. And so I think these younger generations, I mean, they get short shrift, but I tell you what, some of these younger generations, I talk to a lot of students and stuff, talk to my own children that are the same age, people in their, early 20s and stuff. And, their brains don't work the same, because of what they've lived with their entire time. I mean, I'm in that crossover, I mean, I've got a pretty good grasp on technology. I've worked in it for years and all that kind of stuff. My kids intuit this stuff. I can't get my iPhone to work. Well, hand it to your 5-year-old. He'll figure it out, and it's true. I'm tech support for my 70 some odd year old parents.
Yeah.
And I'm going, man, what did you do? What did you click on? I didn't do anything, and so we got to understand that these younger generations are questioning things that we took for granted, and they're not afraid to, and God bless them for it. Because there were so many things, especially those in front of me, when you get into the boomers and all that kind of stuff, where there were certain things you just took for granted and you didn't question. It was the way things were. This is the way we did it. And then you kind of move on through, Gen X, Gen Y, all those. And it's well, why do we do it that way? Is there a better way? And now the kids are like, I ain't doing it. That's stupid, and they're pretty blunt. Honestly.
Well, with all that said, who's better at figuring it out? Is it someone old like me? Because you're right. My generation was you get a job and that's what you do for the next 30 years. Totally different. And it sounds like they've had a lot more challenges and they've questioned things a lot more than we did. So are they just going to be generally, because of those experiences, better at figuring it out?
I'm going to give the standard answer, especially since no one said it yet. It depends. Because you have your innovators, you have your geniuses in every generation. You have your people that are outside the box who are going, box? What box? You got that in every generation. And today, you have people in these new generations who are going to stay inside the box where it's nice and warm and safe. Period. Just like you have in every other generation. So I don't think we can say by a generation, this generation is better at problem solving. Well, I mean, the generation before me put people on the moon.
Yeah.
Can you say they weren't problem solving? That's a pretty big problem. So it's just different problems. Are they better at it? Maybe. Are they better at solving computer problems? Oh, yeah. You ask my 76-year-old dad to solve a computer problem, he's going to call Best Buy and say, I need Geek Squad. Where my kids, they've got parts all over the kitchen table as they're going through going, this doesn't work right. Totally different paradigm. But, when you put people into their realm, and you're going to have people who are just going to go, okay, what, I need my rails. Keep me in thing. And you're going to have others that aren't. And it's going to be the same across generations. So I can't really generalize and say, this new generation is better at problem solving because their problems are different. And you're going to have some that are successful. You're going to have some that are not. You're going to have some that are on the bleeding edge and others that are going, that's dangerous over there. So.
Well, I still like saying to younger generation, you're younger, figure it out. Let me go back to you, Heather, because, Lee was starting to talk about computing and, we already have AI who's pretty good at thinking for us. Yeah, well, they're getting there. But quantum computing is coming along now, and that's just going to entirely change the game in the way we see the world and the tools that we have. And I'm a little worried after our discussion that basically computing is going to come along and figure it out for us, and 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 we're going to be like so tied to these computers and not really question whether or not that's a good answer. But if AI says it's good, then we're going to go with it.
Well, I have my own things about AI. I don't think that it's the worst thing, but I always tell my students, especially because I'll receive these lovely AI written essays, and I always tell them you are always a better writer than AI. And in terms of workers and like I read an article yesterday. I'll have to find it because as soon as you were talking about this, it came in my mind, but now I can't remember the title of it. And it was talking about how people are afraid that AI might take over the workforce. And while AI is definitely in everything that we seemingly do nowadays, it's not that it's going to take our jobs. One, because it's still, as I tell my students, it's still dumb in the sense of it will spit out some wild things. But two, the people that can leverage AI are those who's going to get further along. And not just AI, but other technological advancements. Those that stay up to date and can use it and use it ethically and within like the scope that it works in, um, will be able to get further along. Now, the AI itself, by itself, no, I don't see that happening, at least not in my lifetime. Who knows? It could. I can't say it's never going to happen, but being able to leverage it as a tool. If you remember back when digital calculators were becoming a thing, people were up in arms saying that we were never going to be able to do arithmetic equations and be able to compute math in our head. And now that could be the case for some that have been solely dependent on calculators, but for others, it's just used simply as a tool to help them along.
Well, thank you for that. I am of that generation where we got to use calculators in algebra class, but not for the exam.
Yes.
But I'm also like, I remember when calculators, not everyone had one. They were sort of a new thing, and they improved a lot. And even now I'm hearing, if you're a script writer for a film, you can get AI to write a script, but then you need an actual writer to go through it and actually make it good. Are not we going to see that with AI, and especially in something like writing essays where the technology is, because I agree with you, it's not there yet, but it's going to get there. And will we use, well, will we use AI for more written work and sort of eventually sort of like the calculator where it's just easier?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I was brainstorming I teach at different places, and we've noticed just that huge increase of AI written work. And it's not that AI written work is inherently bad, but it's not great. And so I always tell my students, if you're going to use it as a way to help you gather your thoughts, and then you can edit it and revise it. Now, sometimes it'll still look AI. I will tell you, for years before AI was even a thing, I would structure my writing in a way that now looks like AI. And so then I was questioned by certain people, like, is this AI? And I'm like, oh, no, it's just I can literally show you things from years ago, and this is how I've always structured my stuff, but I always do it the same way so that it looks very similar all the time. But we've actually brainstormed getting rid of the essays and those kind of materials and having students do something else to show that they are retaining the information. They're able to synthesize it and evaluate it in a different way. So maybe we won't fully get rid of essays, but maybe we're going to find something new. And it just has to do with us being adaptable and embracing the change rather than trying to prevent it.
Well, change is good.
Yeah.
Sometimes. All right. Well, our hour is up. We're a couple of minutes actually over. So thank you very much. Another great discussion. We get into a new month next week. So I have no idea what our topic's going to be. Heather, have you heard anything?
I have not. I was actually going to look while you were saying this. I have no idea.
I already looked. There's nothing there. But if you
No.
go to the CBOC website, as you're listening to this podcast, Jeremy will already have put something in there. So we'll be good to go next week. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Heather, for your guidance over the last month. Great conversations once again. Come back and lead us again in a few months and bring us some more wonderful topics.
I love it. Thank you. I'll
And thank
count
you,
us down. Oh,
Okay. And thank you, everyone, for your contributions today. Once again, great conversation. I'm so lucky to be spending an hour every single week with such brilliant people. And you help me not only with work life, but life in general. So thank you very much for that. And with that said, we'll see everyone back here in 7 days' time. And Heather, if you want to count us out.
yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.